Hey everyone, before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder that the video versions of Digging for Kryptonite will end in March 2022. The podcast will continue on, but if you wish to continue being part of my Superman fan journey, which I very much hope you will, please make sure that you are subscribed to Digging for Kryptonite via your audio podcast platform of choice. We're on all major podcast platforms, so please make sure you subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And again, the video podcast will continue until March 2022. All right, and now, on with the show. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me for Superman, the animated series Mixtapes Volume 3, returning guest, Jeremy Frutkin. Welcome back.
Anthony, it might have been said before, but now more than ever, it bears me asking you this question again. Are you feeling a little brave and a little bold?
Good man, and perfectly appropriate because this episode we are talking about a collection of episodes from Superman the Animated Series, plus one from Batman, dealing with the various DCU team-ups that we got between Superman and other members of the DC Pantheon. Listen, before I rattle off the episodes we're going to be discussing and really get into this, I want to congratulate you on your move. In between episodes 2 and 3 of our 5-part event, you and your family moved from South Carolina to New York. No small feat. You have a small child. It's a pandemic is still going on. You're crossing state lines. And I just, on behalf of myself and the audience, I want to thank you for keeping this appointment. I did give you multiple outs, but you were adamant that you were like, I want to do this. And you've had so much going on. And I really want to thank you for doing this and congratulate you on your move.
Oh, Anthony, thank you so much. And, not only as a work friend, but also as a friend, just your check-ins and, just talking to me and seeing how things are going really means a lot to me. So both on air and off, your friendship means a lot to me. And, for those of you who might be watching this video, I'm coming into you live from my phone. A bunch of my equipment actually got damaged in the move. And Anthony and I, a little inside baseball, we actually just tried to troubleshoot and kind of get things working. And this is the best we could do. And the show goes on, as we like to say. And I actually said this to you off air, so to speak, but longtime viewers of the show and listeners will know that I've talked to you from a variety of different locations, from hotel rooms, from other houses in South Carolina, now for where I'm coming to you from New York on a variety of different equipment. And if that tells you nothing, it should tell you that I'm here because I love being here. I love talking Superman and DC and just greater comic books with you. And I love the community that we have here and all the feedback I see on Twitter, on the Flat Squirrel Facebook page. And it's just such a wonderful universe that you've created to have us be a part of. So I will always do everything in my power to be a part of it.
Well, that's very kind. I appreciate that. And I guess a couple of quick follow-ups. One, you mentioned that you've done episodes with me from various places. One of them was from a hotel, I believe, when you were working on the Manscaped commercial that you did.
Live from Greenville, South Carolina is what I wanted to name that episode. He wouldn't let me, folks, but
Well, if I'm not mistaken, that was the episode that became How Superman Inspired Me, right? That was the one.
That's right.
And I'm very happy to announce for the first time on the show that episode won an award. It won a Siegel and Schuster Award of Excellence, which was an award ceremony conducted by the Daily Planet website. And it was voted on by the public, by you potentially, if you're listening to this or watching this. And it happened kind of quickly. It's so quickly, in fact, that I didn't have an opportunity to even talk about it on one of these episodes. But, I posted about it on social media, and I'm just so honored, and I'm so grateful to everyone who voted, and to you, Jeremy, for obviously being part of that episode with me, but also for encouraging me to do it. That was the episode that was all about how a scene from the Superman and Lois pilot, when Clark is talking to his son about how Pa Kent didn't always have all the answers, but he was there, in no small part motivated me to make a change at work. And if people want the full story, they can go, listen to or watch that episode. But the fact that resonated with even just a few people really means the world to me. And so thank you to everyone who voted, and thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to the Daily Planet website for even, creating this opportunity. It's really very, very cool, and I'm honored.
We're an award-winning duo, and I'm coming to you on the first episode for that. I'm coming to you from my cell phone. So How the Mighty Have Fallen. And but in all seriousness, of course, Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to you, Anthony. Thank you to the wonderful Digging for Kryptonite community that we have here. Thank you, Daily Planet. You guys have been awesome. And to all the other podcasts that I've been getting to know just a little bit on Twitter, it's been so cool, this kind of sense of a larger community and larger world that we're kind of growing here with all of these other Superman-centric podcasts that I think is so cool. So, I love podcasts, obviously, as much as I love Superman and DC and comic books. We all do. Chances are, if you're listening to this, you love podcasts in general, too. And this is the very first time in my life that I've ever been a part of anything that's ever won any kind of award in a podcast. So, in all sincerity, it is extremely special to me. So, thank you, thank you, thank you.
One of the nice benefits of it is that, there are people in my life who might not really know what all of this is about, this podcasting thing that Anthony does. So it's nice that now I can say I won an award. So even if they're still not entirely sure, I can't even say my mother, because I think she gets it, and she was on an episode of my other show, My Comic Shop History. So I think she has a pretty good sense. But my mother-in-law or other people, it's like, no, I guess it's an award. It's an award-winning. But we won for best multimedia story, which was very cool. And we were nominated for a few different awards, and honestly, it really was an honor to be included with such great company, and kind of, building off of what you said, being part of this community of fellow Superman podcasts and podcasters has been truly one of the unexpected highlights of this process. And I've said this before in other episodes, but when I started this, I didn't, one of the roadblocks, and thankfully it was not anything that really held me back, but one of the roadblocks was, there's so many Superman podcasts, right? But it's just been such a welcoming community, and it's been so cool. And on that note, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, Jeremy, but in both of our episodes so far of Superman the Animated Series Mixtapes, you've gotten a very nice shout out from the Always Hold On to Smallville podcast, its host, Zach Moore. After the first episode, he echoed your sentiment about Brainiac being Superman's arch nemesis on the animated series. And he further backed you up after Volume 2 came out, our second episode, with your take on Metallo, and how this is the definitive version of the villain Metallo. So, again, no pressure, but I feel like, we gotta go for the hat trick here.
Yeah, again, shout out to Always Hold On to Smallville. That's awesome. I've enjoyed our little talks and interaction. I hope we all get to talk more. And don't worry, I'm coming in with some more hot takes for this episode as well, too. I've got some interesting insight, I hope, to keep this streak alive. We shall see, though. We shall see.
And then finally, one more bit of business related, actually, to Always Hold On to Smallville. So for the most part, I tend to record these episodes in order, but occasionally I will record out of order. And I have recorded an upcoming episode with Zach, the host of Always Hold On to Smallville. And it's an episode about our Smallville wish lists. Things that we wish the decade-long television show Smallville had or had not done. And we've talked on the show before about the length of some of these episodes. As Zach and I were approaching, I think it was like the hour and 45-minute mark, I said to him, and it's in the show, people can hear it when it comes out. I was like, we can just kind of do a quick lightning round with the remaining items on our list, if you want, and just kind of wrap this up. Because, I always try to be mindful of people's time. And bless his heart, he was like, I blocked out my night for this. Let's keep going. And we did.
I love it. That conversation sounds very familiar to me, and I love it. That's awesome. That is fantastic.
I'm excited for people to hear it. It's one of those episodes where, I think even if you're not a Smallville fan, we really had a fun conversation, and we tried to put everything in context, so I think people would still get something out of it. But if you're a Smallville fan, whether you're a casual fan or a hardcore fan, I really, really think this is an episode you're going to enjoy. So that's coming mid-February, and I really hope people tune in for that. It was so much fun to record. So my thanks to Zach, and again, that'll be out in mid-February, but that's coming.
Mid-February, I'm excited. Can't wait to listen.
All right. Here we are at the midpoint of the animated series Mixtapes that we've been doing. Again, each episode, we're selecting episodes from Superman the Animated Series that all sort of revolve around a particular element or theme or character. And so for this one, our theme is DCU team-ups. So let me give a quick rundown of the episodes from Superman the Animated Series we'll be talking about for this installment. So we'll be discussing the 3-part World's Finest, which of course featured the first meeting of Superman and Batman in the DC animated universe. Nighttime, when Batman goes missing and Superman has to impersonate Batman and get to the bottom of the mystery. The Demon Reborn, Batman and Superman versus Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, depending on your pronunciation. I did throw in one episode from Batman the Animated Series, Girls' Night Out, where Supergirl and Batgirl team up against Harley, Ivy, and Livewire. So those are the Bat-centric episodes. And then looking at the wider DCU, we have Speed Demons, introducing Flash, Hands of Fate, introducing Dr. Fate, and you and I have wildly different takes on that episode, so I'm really excited.
Oh, I can't wait. Cannot wait.
In Brightest Day, introducing a version of Green Lantern is the nicest thing I can say.
I have questions. I
have some hot takes on that episode too. A Fish Story, introducing Aquaman to the world of the show. And then a pair of episodes that I suspect, knowing both of us, we'll have a lot to say and will probably be a favorite. Prototype and Heavy Metal, introducing John Henry Irons, first in his civilian identity, and then in the second episode as Steel. So that's a dozen episodes. We got a lot to talk about. The first question I have for you, just a preliminary question. Did you watch, again, you and I are the same age, so we might have a similar experience with this, but was Super Friends in any of its various iterations, was that at all a thing for you when you were a kid?
So the short answer is no, but I did, when I was a teenager, go back and watch a bunch of them. So it's not like I grew up watching them. That would be a cheat for me to say. But once I was kind of already interested in DC and in animation, I did go back and see a bunch of the Super Friend animated shows. I mean, it's such an iconic part of DC history and DC animation history. It's one of those things that kind of transcends even just quote unquote comic books, right? For a long time, even now to an extent, I think it's in the pop culture zeitgeist almost for that show.
Yeah, no, very, very true. I mean, I guess my experience is not entirely dissimilar, although I've not yet had the experience of, really diving in. And I will likely do that at some point in the future on this podcast. But, as a kid, I definitely remember watching episodes from time to time. I guess they were on Cartoon Network at some point.
That sounds right to me. Yeah.
So I definitely have memories of watching Super Friends as a kid, but it just wasn't a big thing for me. It was not a formative, part of my Superman fan journey. I know, for fans of a certain age, that was everything, and I totally get that. I don't have that same frame of reference. And I bring that up because, that had existed, but outside of that, to my knowledge, right, you really didn't have instances of these characters interacting outside of the pages of the comic. You did have Super Friends, but again, for us as kids, that wasn't a big thing. These days, we've now seen the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited cartoons, the Young Justice cartoon. We got a proper Justice League movie on HBO Max only. That's the only place we got a proper Justice League movie, but we got it.
I like the dig.
We got to always get that in.
I was ready for it.
That's all I'll say. And on television, my goodness, we've had, the Arrowverse, flawed and all, but it's given us, all of these characters coming together on screen.
They gave us Kevin Conroy back as Batman. So at the very least, we should nod a cap for that related to what we're speaking about here today. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, very, very true. But, I say all of that to say that, now we've gotten used to seeing these characters on screen together. We've gotten used to seeing the multiverse on screen. It's kind of crazy as an adult to get to see all of this stuff that as a kid, I didn't really know was even within the realm of possibility. And again, I say all of this to say that when these team-up episodes first happened on Superman the Animated Series, I mean, I don't know what your memory is, but I remember feeling like, whoa, like this is a big deal.
Yeah. Their events, they were huge events. I was like, whoa, you're really seeing these worlds colliding. Because you're right. Because in the comics, of course, at that time, we've been seeing, the of course the Justice League and team ups and the little Brave and the Bold joke I even made at the top of this show for sure. But it really, I mean, up until that point, for people of a certain age who were, I think, maybe too young to really have that formative experience with Super Friends, but just young enough that when this show hit, this was kind of like our formative animated experience with Superman and the larger DC universe. This really was the first time, kind of off the page, off the comic book page, that these characters were getting together, interacting, and coming to life. And I know that it must have been formative for me, just because when I first looked this list of episodes, I'm not going to lie to you and say I remembered everything bit by bit by bit, every detail, but I could remember bits and pieces, or at least the structure for a good majority of those episodes, just looking at the list that you presented.
Yeah, same here. And what I've come to realize now that we've done a few of these episodes here, I think that towards the end of the show's run, because I know I previously said I watched, Saturday mornings and weekday afternoons, and I did, but I think at a certain point, maybe even before the show ended, that kind of stopped for me. But I have seen all the episodes because, like I said, I did, buy them on DVD when they came out years later, and I watched them. But the later episodes, I might have only seen once when I did that DVD binge. So like the earlier shows from Superman the Animated Series, those are like kind of seared into my brain. But some of the later ones, like A Fish Story with Aquaman, it was as if I was watching that with fresh eyes this time, because I think I probably only saw it once, whereas Speed Demons I've seen multiple times. So that one was far more familiar to me.
Speed Demons was, I think, maybe the most familiar one, even off that list. I'm in agreement there. Maybe you just blocked A Fish Story out because it wasn't that good.
We're split on yet another one because I actually quite
I'm
liked.
coming in. I'm coming in with the heavy hitters already, man. I'm ready.
It's funny. I know when I gave the order of episodes, I listed all the Batman stuff first, but I think we can kind of jump around. And actually, if we're going in terms of air date, Speed Demons was the first one that came. So the Flash was the first outside character who was introduced to the world of this show. And well, before what was your take on Speed Demons?
So here's the interesting thing. I try to look at every single episode we watch, and through every medium and everything we watch or reread, I try to approach it with completely fresh eyes. I try to recognize that so much of what we do, just in general here on the show, is so nostalgia based, right? It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's our passion. It's why we love talking about Superman and DC Comics and the animation and et cetera, et cetera. But I try to look at things also objectively right now. And actually, on that podcast, What Superman Means to Me, I think I talked about how much I love Wally West, and I love a later episode of Justice League, right? That is centric around him. I love that episode. That's one of my favorite episodes of animation in general, full stop. That being said, I don't think this episode was very good.
Wait, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just for longtime listeners, and honestly, this might have even been a Patreon thing where this came up, so most listeners might not even be familiar with this. But our listener and former guest and future guest, Justin DeVoe, noticed that when I am about to articulate a potentially negative opinion, I will preface it with that being said. And it's one of those things where, I think a lot of us, we're not always aware of our tics, but I'm sure for people who are listening, it's they're clearly, we're
going to have t-shirts made that said, that being said.
I think so. So I love that you did that as well. And it's funny because since Justin said that, I've every now and then, like I'll really lean into it or I'll try to use other words, but the spirit is still the same. But in any event.
We've been spending a lot of time together, Anthony. We've been spending a lot of time together. That's great.
When he said that to me, and I think that was a Patreon episode where we talked about Superman, the Man of Tomorrow, the relatively recent animated movie. And I laughed so hard when he said that because it wasn't anything that I was conscious of, but when he said it, I said, oh, yeah, I definitely do that.
I stole your catchphrase.
Hey, it works. So you were not a huge fan of this episode, even though you like the DC animated universe presentation of Flash in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited.
Love it. I love Wally West. Wally West is my favorite fictional Flash. I love Wally. Love, love, love. I like that this episode set it up with kind of that classic, almost golden age, who's faster. That was a nice, like, callback. They're going to have the race. It was cute. There was nothing here. There was nothing here of any, I thought, meaningful substance, and that's what I look for through my critical lens. And I guess that's a good way for me to lean into what my big kind of sweeping take for these episodes, if I may, just to put it out front, is what I gleaned, and my favorite part of all these episodes, all these team-up episodes is that we see that Superman's greatest power isn't his strength, isn't flight, it isn't heat vision. It's his ability to inspire and motivate others. And that, I thought, was so powerful. And in my favorite episodes, that really rings true and becomes kind of a central theme across a bunch of the episodes that I thought were standouts. Here, I felt like the plot was, the Flash is here, he's kind of a jerk, but he still kind of helps saves the day. And okay, they make some jokes at the end and everybody goes on their way. There wasn't that kind of deeper connection that I look for. And, a lot of times in these shows, it's just a few lines that make it, right? A few little lines that put this beautiful bow on everything. And it just didn't get there for me in this episode.
I agree 100%. I had the exact same take on Speed Demons. I remember just thinking to myself, there's no meat on the bone here. It was all very superficial, and it's fun enough in and of itself. And as a kid, I think I was probably very likely more entertained by it than I was now. And, as far as the whole race bit, yes, that was a nice, nod to, the pre-crisis comics. That doesn't really mean much to me, and I've never really been all that interested in who would win in a race. And I know I've said this on the show before, and I feel like more often than not, when people talk about this, people are I feel like a lot of people are on the same page about this, where it's like, let Flash be faster. It's the one thing he has.
He has to be faster. And even in the episode, if you're paying attention, I think there might even be a little throwaway line. He is always slightly ahead.
Yes.
Slightly ahead. So that's his thing. Let him be faster. I agree completely. Give it to Wally, for goodness sake.
Yeah, it's like, but I guess the thing, on the one hand, I guess it makes sense that, it would come up, but it's like, why would this even be a question? It's his one thing. But anyway, yes, we get a nice little nod to that for people who have an affection for the historic, Flash and Superman races. The show purposely doesn't tell us which Flash we're dealing with, though from the personality, True. It is pretty clear that it's Wally West, not Barry Allen or a new creation. Right.
Yeah.
But I think I read an interview or a quote from Bruce Timm or one of the other producers where they said they were purposely ambiguous about it because they weren't sure exactly which one they wanted to commit to. And of course, by the time we get to the Justice League cartoon, we would come to find out that it's Wally West as the Flash. And again, in terms of characterization, that certainly tracks, but the episode doesn't spell it out. We also don't get any backstory, which I didn't necessarily mind. Flash just shows up and it's like, Flash exists in this world, and that's really as much as we get. What I thought was one thing that I did think was interesting, and the flip side of this, I think, is the In Brightest Day episode, which I have a lot to say about. But here, this almost feels like a Flash episode that Superman is guest starring in, right? I mean, the main villain is the Weather Wizard.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, that also was very silly too. And I know, the Weather Wizard is just by definition, and we suspend our disbelief habitually here as comic book fans with what we do. I get that, but first of all, the name the Weather Wizard, they should have used his real name instead of the Weather Wizard, and just wasn't it a Cumulus or something like that? Wasn't it that his real name or something like that before he was the Weather Wizard, the scientist? Oh, Nimbus, maybe that was it.
Mark Martin. I think that's a different character because that sounds very familiar. Character?
It does, right? Maybe I'm getting all my weather villain puns swirled around here. But yeah, I mean, the Weather Wizard is just a silly name. Is my first little minor note. That's very silly and of a certain time. With all due respect being said, yeah, I mean, it's not particularly enthralling. I mean, he's just throwing a bunch of weather at them as they're running around. It just doesn't really do much for me. The best we got to any kind of gravitas was the younger brother being like, "You have to stop him. He's out of control." And even that was a kind of just like a minor blip in the whole episode, really.
Yes. And, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, essentially in this episode, we have, Wally being, or the Flash, really being, a showboat and a bit of a hothead and being kind of flippant, right? And Superman, he's participating in this race for charity, but, clearly he's not all that enamored with the Flash's antics. But he sees over the course of the episode that, the Flash is willing to stop the race with him to try to stop Weather Wizard, and he displays his heroism. And, it ends with him saying like, oh, I see you can take things seriously, when the situation calls for it, or whatever, that's the spirit of it, I guess. And that's it. And which, is okay. But I don't know. Like I said, I didn't feel like there was much meat on the bone, and it would have been nice to get, like, I don't think it could definitely, like, this episode didn't, reveal anything about Superman's character, really. And for Flash, again, very superficial. It's like, okay, like, he's silly, but, he's a hero when he needs to be. And that's about it.
I would have, a few thoughts on that. If this episode was in a different run of an animated series, it might have been fine. But I guess the curses of these shows is that for us, a lot of times the bar is so high because they've reached such amazing heights in 20 minutes in what is ostensibly an animated show for television for children, right? But for all ages, and reaches these heights that even as adults can really just move you and make you think and look at things critically. The bar is so high that when it doesn't hit and it is a little more surface level, it does kind of stand out. It does kind of stand out. It didn't really. I think you put it best. Towards the top of our discussion of this, there's not a lot of meat on the bone on this episode. Not a lot of meat on the bone at all. But I would have loved, and this is easy for me to Monday morning quarterback, of course, but I would have loved even just like a throwaway scene where we see Wally calling somebody or something to reveal that maybe he is still new and maybe he is a little nervous and scared and maybe he's overcompensating because he feels like he has to be, we've all either been or known somebody who tries so hard to play it cool that it's just too much. And that's kind of the vibe I was getting from Wally. Just something to humanize him, to be like, oh, okay, wow. Like, yeah, I've been scared before too and kind of nervous, especially around Superman. Maybe he feels intimidated. Something for us not to care about the Flash, but to care about Wally as a person, to make us connect to the character. I would have loved. And we get there. We certainly get there, as I've talked about before. But that's what I would have loved to have seen.
Even a little bit of that would have gone a long way. So I agree with you totally. This might sound nitpicky and it's so small, but I did not care for the black around the circle on his emblem.
I wonder why they did that.
I suspect, look, I don't know, but it might not have been an aesthetic choice. It might have been an instance where that, for whatever reason, made it easier to animate. We didn't talk about this, but, with this animated series, right, they didn't have the yellow S on Superman's cape because that would have proven difficult to animate, which I got to tell you, I prefer the plain red cape generally.
I do too.
I like that better.
Superman should be less flashy, right? It goes to me with a kind of that version of the character I think we both enjoy. A little more modest and humble, and, he doesn't have to, it's on the front. Why put it on the back?
Yeah, and the red, I don't know, the cape in and of itself, is majestic. It's really striking. I think there's enough there, but maybe that had something to do with it. I don't really know. Or they just, maybe it was a design choice. I'm not sure. But yeah, that was Speed Demons. It certainly wasn't a bad episode, but again, I agree with you. I think in terms of what we know the show can do, this didn't live up to it, and so it sort of paled in comparison. But overall, in fairness, right, like this was the first time they were bringing in a character from the wider DC universe, and
it's their first try.
It wasn't a home run, but like it was a solid. I never talk sports, but it was like a solid single or double. Like it was fine. Like it was fine.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad episode. It just doesn't reach the heights that we know it will reach later.
Now I know I'm going a little out of order here, but I gotta talk about this Green Lantern episode because it bothered me a lot.
You look like you're in pain. You need to get this off your chest, please.
Okay, so even though Speed Demons wasn't my favorite episode, I appreciated that the Flash came in fully formed, and it really felt like a team up. And like I said, if anything, it was like we were in the Flash's world, right? We were dealing with the Flash villain, and Superman was there.
Yeah.
The In Brightest Day episode. Kind of, it was interesting, to put it diplomatically, for a couple of reasons. One was the amalgam of Hal Jordan and Kyle Rayner that we got, and we can unpack that. And I do think there are behind the scenes reasons for that do make sense, and I am sympathetic to that. I think the producers did the best they could with probably the parameters that they had to work within.
Sure.
But the thing that bothered me more about In Brightest Day was that they took a Green Lantern origin story and they made it a Superman story, to the point where Superman meets the Guardians before Green Lantern does. And
that's correct.
I'm not even that big a Green Lantern fan, and it kind of bothered me. And I was like, if I were really a Green Lantern fan, this episode would piss me off. Yep. So that's the thing where, and I'm going to jump ahead yet again, just for a second. I thought the fish story episode with Aquaman, which I know you weren't a big fan of, but that to me struck a nice balance where Aquaman came in fully formed. They weren't transforming an Aquaman origin story into a Superman episode. He came fully formed, but unlike Speed Demons, they at least made the effort of digging into the philosophical differences and debate between Superman and Aquaman. Like, you understood why there was some tension there. So that to me felt like, okay, that's a nice balance of an episode compared to the Flash and Green Lantern episodes. But for Green Lantern, those big picture were the two big things that just really, really kind of put me off. What were your thoughts on In Brightest Day?
I am not sure what the exact point of that episode was, because the way with the urgency and focus that everything was introduced in Superman was involved, you would think that Kyle Rayner works at the Daily Planet also, which also is kind of a little bit of a, it's fine. He's there, he's working, cool. But you almost think that they really put this urgency in this episode because he was going to be a reoccurring character. He was part of the staff at the Daily Planet. Superman, like you said, like it really is like a Superman Green Lantern origin story hybrid. So at the very least, I would have almost been able to forgive a little bit of this episode if Kyle was part of that supporting cast with Lois and Jimmy. And I mean, he works at the planet. He's there already. That could have been an interesting extra dynamic. But then there's just nothing. It's like, what's the point of all of that? I just don't understand like exactly what the point of making this such like an urgent, big, jam-packed, almost unnecessarily so story if it's not going anywhere. And we don't ever see Kyle Rayner again in Superman, do we?
No.
So what's the point of it is my question,
And by the time we get to Justice League, John Stewart is our Green Lantern.
Yeah.
My understanding is in either later Justice League or I think more specifically Unlimited episodes, I think we do see Kyle, but I don't think he gets much play specifically.
John Stewart's the Green Lantern, the focus. Yeah.
I'm with you. Had Kyle been a supporting cast member, right? And we were sort of, look, talking about Smallville for a second. It's like, we saw a lot of characters, you don't necessarily think of Green Arrow as a Superman supporting character, but the show made him that, and I could get on board with that.
Why not? Tell a good story. We'll go with it. Why not? Sure.
But here I agree with you. we see him once and never again. And we'll talk more about the two John Henry Irons episodes, but I really liked both of those episodes, but it took an episode and a half to get him into that steel armor, and we never see him again.
And that's the thing. And I know we're jumping around as you and I do. If you're asking me like what I think objectively like the best storytelling is, I think it is those two episodes. I think I would have to say those two are my favorite because it is the weight and the payoff. And yes, like we do see him down the line, I believe too, in Justice League Unlimited and everything like that, which is kind of a halfway out, because obviously there was no way to know that going down the line, even though they do, again, the masters of long form storytelling here. But I really love the storytelling in that episode, and it did take longer, but there was such a better payoff, at least. Like I knew who these characters were, what their motivations were. And the one thing I did like about the Green Lantern episode that I also really, really liked about the saga here with Steel is you get those inspirational bits and lines from Superman as he's encouraging these heroes on their way. When he says to Kyle at the end, he goes, why are you choosing me? All I do is daydream. I'm in a fantasy world half the time. And Superman kind of gives him that reassuring, sounds like you're perfect for the job. And I love that one. That was the best part of that episode, I thought, to be honest with you. And we see it again. We see it twice, really, in both of the episodes, right, with Steel, when he says, I could really, it'd be good to have a hand around here. And that moment at the very end, when he is Steel, when he comes up to him and he doesn't know, is Superman going to be ticked off or mad? And he goes, you're going to be hearing this a lot. And he puts his hand out and he says, thank you. Oh, my goodness. What a beautiful moment. That to me is the bar where I love to live and see this show hitting. That was such a good payoff. And again, that's to me is when Superman's at his best, truly. And I'm going to jump around a little bit here too, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
I think my second favorite episode, I know we're split on this one, is the Dr. Fate episode. I love that episode for the storytelling, and the Lovecraftian horror doesn't hurt as well too. I love that. I also love that the magic, gives Superman something else to that he can't quite fight against. Again, we always talk about how some people are like, oh, well, Superman's, invulnerable, is too strong. I mean, he's got kryptonite and magic. It's such a great opposing force for Superman in that regard too. The point being, the reason why I love that episode is why I loved those moments in the others. It's because we see Kent Nelson, Dr. Fate, who doesn't want to fight anymore. He's done. He's retired. And I got to tell you, Anthony, of all the beatings I feel like I've been taking, both mentally, physically, and emotionally with these moves, that moment resonated with me personally, maybe more than it would have otherwise, if I'm being completely honest, where he says, the evil and the bad stuff is just going to keep coming. It's just going to keep coming. And, when Superman says, why'd you come back? Was it something I said? He says, no, it was something you did. You knew you were going to die, facing certain doom, but you went anyway. It's not just the evil that's never going to stop. And of course, I'm paraphrasing here, but that moment, it struck such a chord with me. And I thought was such a beautiful message that immediately tells you who Dr. Fate is, which, let's be real here. Dr. Fate on the grand scheme, I'm not going to sit here and be like, I'm a huge Dr. Fate fan. This episode definitely made me more of a Dr. Fate fan. As I showed you, I'm over here reading the 87 four-part DeMatteis run over here just because I was so inspired by that episode. But more importantly, that does arguably the best job, I think, of telling you who Superman is through that lens. Because he's somebody who never, ever gives up. He went back no matter the odds. And somebody who was older and tired and beaten and just didn't want to fight anymore. He got him back in the game. And that, to me, is Superman, man. It's beautiful.
All right. You know what? So first of all, with the Steel stuff, I agree totally. And we can circle back to that. With Dr. Fate, we messaged about it ahead of time, the Hands of Fate episode. And I said it was my least favorite. And you said it was one of your favorites. And I said, we'll have a fun conversation about it. I got to tell you, I think you've kind of turned me around on it a good bit. And that's one of the reasons I love doing this because, and I feel like this is very important for all of us as fans, is to try to keep as open a mind as possible. And things that might not really work for us might really resonate with other people. And, hearing you describe that does kind of put the episode in a new light. I'll say that the reason why I was not the biggest fan of the Dr. Fate episode, probably three things. One, I do remember this as a kid, and I didn't like it then. And I think it just kind of always stayed with me. And as a kid, I don't know that I could have necessarily put my finger on why, but it was just one of those episodes that I was always like, this was not my favorite. And I think I kind of still had that baggage with me. Watching it now, I get what you're saying. I've never been a huge fan of stories that pit Superman against the supernatural or magic. And this whole bit about, magic being one of his weaknesses, it is, right? And I get it, but I know I've said this on another episode, but I guess the thing that there's always been a little bit of a disconnect for me, and maybe I'm just missing something. I don't know, but it's like, why wouldn't magic be a weakness? Like, his powers are physical, like they are rooted in the physical world. So the idea that the metaphysical or the mystical or whatever you want to call it would be a challenge for him, like, of course it would be. And so the fact that it's always singled out, it's like kryptonite and magic. I don't know. There's always been that thing where, and I guess that's more maybe even semantics, but I guess I've never really loved the stories that I have read or watched that deal with Superman and the supernatural. They've just never really done much for me.
And I understand that. Like, from a logical standpoint, I totally understand your perspective and what you're saying. I think it's an inherent clash stylistically and kind of tonally, maybe even a little bit, which I think is definitely really jarring, can be hard to swallow. I like the idea of putting Superman in situations where, like we talked about, so much of the show does a good job of putting him up against the ropes, to use an expression that we both very much enjoy, where you can kind of see him in that danger, in that peril. Well, he does need to phone a friend.
Yeah.
Where he does need to tag in some help. And I think that's just such a great, and is it a little bit of a MacGuffin and a plot device? Sure. I mean, you're right. Absolutely. To be like, oh yeah, and magic. But I think the ends, at least for me, the ends justify the means, because we do at least get him in a position where you can tell stories with that you couldn't otherwise, where he is going to need some help, or maybe go up against a foe that he's going to have to maybe rely on his intelligence, something that you and I both love about Clark as well too, to kind of, he just can't fly and punch, and he has to actually, think and use tactics and strategies and really show off, those critical thinking skills that Clark has as well. But I thought this episode, more than any other, embodied what Superman is to me through that inspirational lens. Because let's be real here. I'm not going to sit here and be like, Dr. Fate is one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. There are fans of Dr. Fate. I'm more of a Dr. Fate fan now, just from that episode in this comics that I'm reading now, than I've ever been. Pierce Brosnan is playing him in the upcoming. That's pretty cool casting. That's pretty cool. But I mean, he's really, with all due respect, again, he's, kind of an ancillary, superhero, not really, a heavy hitter like, a lot of the other characters that we've talked about on this list. He's probably the least popular out of all of these team up episodes. Like, if you were to take a general poll, I'd be willing to probably be last by probably a decent margin, right? So this episode doesn't get my vote because I think Dr. Fate is so cool and so awesome, even though it did win me over a little bit in that regard too. Don't get me wrong. But it's because I think it does the best job of embodying who Superman is through that lens.
I'll say, as far as Dr. Fate generally, I'm not the biggest Dr. Fate fan either. My main experience with the character is as a member of the ensemble in the late 90s, early 2000s Justice Society comics by Jeff Johns, which I loved.
So good. Yep.
But again, he's not the focal point. But those were really the main stories that I've experienced with that character. And then of course, Smallville did use him in season 9 when they brought in the Justice Society. And that is one of my favorite scenes, actually, probably from the show, where he's like, he gives Clark a little hint about his future. And he says, "You will lead this generation as Hawkman once led ours." But my favorite part from that scene is when he tells Clark that even though Lex Luthor is his ultimate opponent, Clark will triumph over him. And Clark says, "But Lex is dead." Dr. Fate just looks at him. Just looks at him.
I love it.
That's
love
great.
it. Yeah.
Dr.
Fate underrated. Maybe underrated is what we're coming to the conclusion here.
Yeah, no, solid character. I am really excited for the Black Adam movie and to see Pierce Brosnan in that role. I think that'll be really cool. But the last reason why I didn't love this Dr. Fate episode, and for anyone who needs a quick refresher, the villain Karkle is released and
terrible name.
And takes over the Daily Planet and turns everyone into demons, and Superman can't penetrate the force field, so he has to go to track down, Dr. Fate to try to get help. And like you said, Fate initially turns him away. He's done. He's out of the game. And Kent Nelson, aka Dr. Fate, his wife Inza, gives Superman a talisman, gives him something at least to try to help him in the battle. Mm-hmm. And that allows Superman to penetrate the force field and try to win the day. But of course he's unable to do it on his own. But then Dr. Fate arrives and they're able to turn the tide. But the reason why I didn't really like it, and this is where you've really, I think, turned me around, I kind of felt watching it, and it's funny, just the different reactions that we can have to an episode, because I watched it, I'm like, what was the point of this? It would have been more interesting if Superman didn't know who to turn to and he had to find Dr. Fate, because this is another instance where we get no backstory. Clearly he's had some encounter with Dr. Fate that we've not been privy to, right? So he knows who to go to. And so the tension in this episode is that Dr. Fate doesn't want to help. And I guess I felt like, well, it would have been more interesting if Superman had to figure out who to go to. But honestly, this really is where you've turned me around. I think that it does work, and it does, to your point, speak to, again, that power to inspire, which is ultimately, at its heart, really the crux of Superman, that he chooses to use his powers the way he does, and that he's able to bring this out in other people. Like that's the character. And this does a good job of explaining that. So, would I put this at the top of my list? No, but I would bump it up. And that's why I'm glad we're doing this, because you've kind of you've kind of recontextualized that episode for me, and I'm more on board with it now than I was before.
Well, I love that. And that's, like you said, that's why it's so wonderful that not only that you and I get to have these conversations, but we get to have these conversations with the greater community as well, too. I always love learning and listening and hearing people's viewpoints, and keeping an open mind about all this as well, too, is such an important lesson for anything, for life in general, to try to see things through other people's viewpoints and eyes. And it's funny, it really struck a chord with me. And I'm wondering, if I wasn't going through all of the current trials and tribulations that I'm going through now on my end personally, if it would have even affected me the so way. But it really made me pay attention, and it really struck a chord with me. It really stuck with me.
Yeah, and that's one of those things, like, stuff just hits you at the right point. I was drinking water and it went down the wrong pipe, so I apologize if it sounds like I'm dying. I'm okay.
He's getting choked up, everybody. Don't let him fool you or lie to you. He's getting all emotional. We're over here, talking about Superman and Dr. Fate. So it's a beautiful thing, really.
I just wasn't on board with this Dr. Fate episode, but now I've seen the light.
That's it. It was fate.
I want to jump back to the In Brightest Day episode, and I'm going to toss it to you for a second while I try to get my my breath back.
Sure.
But I'm assuming, based on our age, that, like myself, Kyle Rayner is your Green Lantern. Is that fair to say, or is Hal your guy?
Hal's my guy. And an interesting change of events, right? Because everybody who's been listening to me to some time knows that I love my Titans, right? And I love those younger heroes. I think DC does it better than anybody in terms of a younger hero, a former sidekick maybe, taking over that mantle. I love Wally's my favorite Flash, and they're going to come for me at the gates with this one, but I've said it before, and I'll stand by it, that Dick Grayson is my favorite Batman as well, too. He's my absolute favorite Batman. I love it. And even though we're of that formative age where Kyle Rayner should have been that, I don't necessarily dislike Kyle. It's just Hal Jordan is still my favorite Green Lantern. And if I had to put my finger on why, maybe it has to do with just the writing, and maybe just the rich history of Hal. Or, now that I'm talking about it, I never really thought about it before, but maybe because no character has ever been done, I hate to use like such a common expression, but ever been done so dirty as Hal Jordan, right? When he became Parallax and he did all that, how could this happen? And all of us, I think, whether you're a huge Green Lantern fan or not, you have to always be cheering for a comeback, because everybody loves a comeback. And I really wonder if that has something to do with it. It never even occurred to me till you and I are sitting here talking about this out loud. And I think seeing him come back and having the whole rebirth and seeing him back in the fold, and just really want to cheer for him. And he's made these horrible mistakes, because that's why we read these comics, we watch these shows, because yeah, they do incredible things we could never do, but they are people just like us, and we've all made mistakes. Some people have made mistakes they thought they could never come back from. And we love redemption and a comeback story. And I think that's why Hal Jordan is my Green Lantern.
All right, fair enough. I guess a couple of things, and this really speaks to a larger, Green Lantern conversation, which I think this podcast will present not too long from now. But I am with you in the comeback aspect. And what's funny is that that's the aspect of the character that I respond to the most. And that's the period of the character's history that most of the old school hardcore Green Lantern Hal Jordan fans, were most upset by. His villainous turn, becoming Parallax, his role in Zero Hour, his death in Final Night, even though he achieved a measure of, redemption with that. Bringing him back as the Spectre, I think people were sort of split on. I thought it was kind of cool.
Interesting choice.
And then his ultimate return as the Green Lantern. I agree. That's the part of the history Well, I don't know, you wonder too, it's like, why do I like that so much? Because I think it's so interesting, or because that's when I was reading? I mean, like I've said many
Right.
times on the show, right? Starting with, the first time I met Hal was, he was attending the funeral of Superman. And then the next time I met him, his city was getting destroyed in Reign of the Superman.
Yeah.
And I think the next time I saw the character was in Zero Hour, and he had already had his heel turn, and and he was Parallax. So all that being said, but this is positive.
Get those T-shirts.
That is the part of the character that that I have always liked. But Kyle has been my Green Lantern, I think, because of when I started reading, and when I did start reading Green Lantern, and even before that, when I started reading JLA featuring Green Lantern, it was Kyle Rayner. So I have that attachment to the character, and I also, this kind of cuts both ways. I've not fully sorted out my thoughts on this, because Hal and the larger Green Lantern Corps, is such a big part of the mythology. And with Kyle, they went in a very different direction, right? There's no Corps, there's no more Guardians. He wasn't chosen. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time. He's an ordinary guy, right? He's not someone without fear. He's just an ordinary guy trying to do the best he can. And that resonated with me, but I recognize that is totally counter to the rest of the mythology and the core of the mythology. So
huge departure.
Yeah. So again, I liked it. And, when I was reading it at the time as a kid, I didn't have any of that backstory. So for me, it wasn't a departure. This was just Green Lantern. So I recognize, like, I kind of have that to sort out. But in any event, in this episode, we get this weird amalgam of Kyle and Hal. So he's an artist, and so his name is Kyle Rayner, and he's an artist like Kyle from the comics. He works at the Daily Planet, so he's been repositioned as a one episode only Superman supporting cast member.
Again, why? Why? If you're not going to use him again, anyway, carry on.
And but he has I guess he has the in addition to the artistic side, I guess some of the self-doubt of Kyle, but he has the physicality of Hal, right? And in the opening scene, he's hanging out with Jimmy Olsen, and a mugger comes by, and Kyle's able to stop him, and he talks about being, playing football at Metropolis University. So there's a physicality to the character that you would associate more with Hal, and definitely not with Kyle, but this version possesses. And then he's given the Hal Jordan origin story. Abin Sur crash lands, the ring finds Kyle, and he's very quickly targeted by Sinestro, again, traditionally a Hal Jordan villain. So it's this blend. I mean, I don't know. Was that off-putting to you, or were you just like, it's like, I'll go along for the ride on this?
No, it was off-putting. It was definitely off-putting. And again, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, kind of right, at the top of it here is, if you are going to have Kyle Rayner be there, and he is going to be this everyman, as a huge departure, at least give the respect to stay in that lane. But he's over here beating up muggers in the beginning of the episode. It's like, what are we doing? Like, choose which lane you're going to be in. If you want Hal, just have him be Hal. But if he's Kyle, I think it's better, like, have him get mugged in the beginning of the episode and pushed down into the gutter and being like, oh, kind of the old just my luck. And, he's down in the dumps. He's like all of us until his real gift is his mind, right? And his creativity, and how Kyle Rayner looks at the world not as it is, but as it could be. And that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, listen, I don't want to get misconstrued what I say here. Hal Jordan is very much my Green Lantern. I like Kyle Rayner. I think that's a cool, and again, you said it, I think, perfectly, where for people of our age, it wasn't such a jarring departure, right? It was just, Green Lantern for a while. I didn't have that huge history with Hal, like so many other fans did. But yeah, I mean, it's, just have him be Kyle Rayner. If you want Hal Jordan, give us Hal Jordan. Don't give us that wink and a nod with the airplane in that episode when he gets knocked into a Colonel Hal Jordan. Just give us Hal if you want to give us Hal. If not, if you're going to have him for just this one episode, which I disagree with, just really give us Kyle Rayner as we know him, as that everyman who's, not good in a fight, who's kind of stuck, at his job, and constantly dreams and sees a world where things are different, things are beautiful, things are strange, but things are better.
Yeah, that's the thing. Whether you're a Hal fan or a Kyle fan, I don't know that either fan base would be totally satisfied by this depiction. And I don't know, I don't think I've really read anything from the writers or producers about what was going on behind the scenes with this, but I doubt this was the case. Maybe they were just like, we love both characters and this is a way to combine them. I don't think that's the case. I mean, I feel like more likely than not, they wanted to use, and again, I'm not speaking for them, I don't know, but I would imagine maybe they wanted to use Hal, but they couldn't because Kyle was the Green Lantern in the comics at the time. So they infused as much of Hal as they could into the Kyle Rayner character, which again, I don't think was really the best path. Where I am sympathetic to them is in the origin, because if you don't give, Kyle's origin, there's so much backstory there about the Corps and Hal going evil. It's like, I don't know that there would have been really any place for that. So they give him Hal's origin, but again, that just, there was like some dissonance there for me. But this is where, going back to what I was saying before, big picture, I would have preferred if we just met Kyle Rayner Green Lantern a few weeks into his career as Green Lantern and struggling, and to your point, needing that inspiration from Superman. That would have been fine. I don't need to see the origin sort of reconfigured in this way and repositioned as a Superman story. Because like I said, I think it was just kind of off note for me. Whereas if they had just done Kyle as Green Lantern and he comes in fully formed, but there's still a role for Superman to play in his development, that I think would have been a solid balance. I would have preferred that.
I could not agree more. That seems like such a good happy medium. And you have this whole, it's not like Kyle Rayner was created just for the TV show, right? Just for the animated series here. You have, he's like you just mentioned, he's the Green Lantern, the premier Green Lantern while the show is on. You have this whole other market. Get kids curious and get them reading, present them, and then be like, oh, that Kyle Rayner guy, that Green Lantern was pretty cool. Let me go pick up a comic book. It's not like this is a new for animated only character that they're using. You have this whole other source material that you can use to build interest, and which I think is always such a beautiful thing about these adaptations is ultimately, as much as I do love our animated shows and our movies and all the other media, I love the fact that it's just going to be bringing kids and adults who've never read a comic book before back to reading a comic book. And I think by doing what you just said, you're not only telling a better story, but you're also keeping that possibility much more open as well.
Yeah. And I mean, look, this idea of Monday morning quarterbacking, again, it's easy to say this now, 25 years later. At the time, I mean, I think there certainly was, like I was saying before, this degree of like, wow, we're actually seeing Green Lantern on screen. That's not nothing. And I do recognize that and I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, like I said, not the biggest Hal Jordan fan. I am a Kyle fan, but I feel like whichever camp you fall in, I don't know that this episode really did it.
There's no wrong answers between Hal and Kyle, but this episode was a master of none. It was a master of none. And again, you I think summed it up perfectly, where either if you're a Hal fan or a Kyle fan, I don't think you're going to be particularly pleased with the presentation here.
Exactly. So we're just about at the 1 hour mark and we haven't talked Batman yet. So we got it. We can circle back to Steel and Aquaman.
Is he important? Do people even like him?
It's funny because when we originally were designing this 5-episode event, it was going to be a 6-episode event and I was going to split off the Batman stuff into its own episodes. And then I was like, let's do it all together. And you were so game and I appreciate it. It certainly could have been its own, but again, I thought it would be fun to kind of look at these team ups together.
Sure.
I know World's Finest, we'll probably spend most of our time there, but can I just say, like, Nighttime is kind of like the unsung hero of this bunch. One of my favorites of the entire series, I think.
I don't know if there is a bad Batman crossover episode in the bunch.
That's true.
And I think that's just such a testament. And that might sound like, okay, it's a handful of episodes. I mean, World's Finest is 3 episodes, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a good amount of episodes here, and they all range from good to incredible, I think. Oh, from good to incredible. So yeah, I agree, and that comes down to the writing, the storytelling, and also the performances. And I've said this before, just like I've said about Tim Daly as Superman and Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor. But when I'm reading a comic, the voice I hear in my head, and I know I'm not alone in this, is Kevin Conroy. He is, and this is kind of a cheeky answer when people who are maybe more casual fans or just fans of the movie say, who's your favorite Batman? My answer is always Kevin Conroy. That he is my absolute favorite actor to who's portrayed Batman. I wish the CW and the Arrowverse gave him a little more to do. I still think it's cool that we saw him there and they gave him a little nod of a cap. Um, but yeah, most people are always clamoring online, Michael Keaton, to do a Batman and Beyond movie. But let's just get Kevin Conroy in it, man. Let's just get Kevin Conroy in there too. I just, he's my Batman. But you know what? You go back to the whole nostalgia aspect that we always talk about, and of us being of a certain age. I'm willing to bet that for people who are older than us and people who are younger than us, that Kevin Conroy probably doesn't mean much to them. And it's such an interesting thing. And you in this podcast has really, we've gone over a couple of decades now, and in the podcast that we've done together, which is super cool as well. You've really given me this huge view of like Superman fandom over the generations, and this huge view where I can kind of contextualize this, that even though Kevin Conroy and these episodes and Batman the Animated Series and everything that came after means so much to me, for a great amount of the fan base, it doesn't. And that's okay too. That's okay too. I would hope, and I'd be willing to bet that most of the people listening to Digging for Kryptonite are probably very familiar with Kevin Conroy's Batman. If by some chance you haven't watched the animated series, I believe most, if not all, are on HBO Max as well too. Go check them out. But all these episodes are phenomenal. So you think would Nighttime be your favorite?
No, I mean, ultimately I have to give the nod to World's Finest, but
there's just no other way, right? It has to be. Yeah.
It's really fantastic, and we'll dive into it. But yeah, I'll jump back to Nighttime in a second. This was so funny to me. So I'll talk about Girls' Night Out for a second. So that's the lone episode of Batman the Animated Series that made it into our Superman the Animated Series mixtape. So
I love that you included that in, though. I thought that was a nice touch.
If I had remembered that Livewire were in it, I wouldn't have. So, okay, so here's the deal.
I love it.
So next week, our theme will be the villains, the Superman Rogues Gallery, right? And we'll be discussing a collection of Superman the Animated Series episodes revolving around the villains. And audience, you'll find out next week, but I'll tell you now. I omitted the Livewire episodes, and if there are any Livewire fans out there, right on. I'm so glad you enjoy the character. Was not my favorite. Lori Petty's great, and in recent years, the voice actors, and in recent years, like my wife and I watched her on Orange Is the New Black, and it was great.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I've never really cared for the character. I just found the character grating, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And you don't like rapid fire electricity puns?
Not so much. And this was an original character for the show.
Yeah.
Which that in and of itself, not a bad thing. It's cool that they were trying to do something a little different.
Boy, Harley Quinn was also for Batman the Animated Series, and those two characters took very different trajectories.
Oh, that 1,000%. And anyway, so I omitted Livewire because for anyone keeping count, by the time Jeremy and I are done with this 5-episode event, we will have rewatched and discussed the vast, vast, vast majority of the 54 episodes. I only left off a small selection. But part of making these mixtapes, we're kind of arranging them by topic, but also, there are some that maybe we're skipping to really boil it down to the best of the series. Mm-hmm. So I left off the Livewire episodes, but again, I threw this into this episode, the Supergirl Batgirl team up, and I had forgotten that Livewire was in it. And when I started watching it, I said, "Oh my God, they got me!" It's like I just could not escape Livewire.
It's extra funny too, because Harley Quinn's right there with her too. So that comment I made actually is even funnier, right? Because they're side by side, original animated creations. Boy, did they take on different lives outside the show. Yeah, I mean, that episode wasn't... it was cool seeing Supergirl and Batgirl together on their home turf. I appreciated that. I just also don't get why Livewire needed to be there when you had Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn already. It should have just been a 2-on-2 match, 2-on-2 dance, right? That would have been completely fine. Yeah. I don't think the Newsarama headline tomorrow is going to be Anthony hates Livewire and the thousands and thousands of Livewire fans are going to come for our heads. I don't think that's going to happen. I say respectfully, I'd say the grand majority of people would say best case scenario, Livewire's inconsequential. Worst case scenario, she's annoying and not that great of a character.
Thank you. I do feel validated and heard, So Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like that episode was fine. And for anyone who is like, hey, why didn't you talk about Supergirl when you did your Krypton episodes? I debated this. It was a debate, but I felt that the two-parter introducing Supergirl to Superman the Animated Series was a better fit for our New Gods episode, which is going to be our big finale. And so we will talk about Supergirl's introduction. But anyway, I threw that in here. It was fun enough to rewatch. Not my favorite episode. Nighttime was great. I mean, like I said at the top, this was the episode where, Batman is missing and Superman poses as Batman and is able to replicate his voice thanks to precise muscle control. And he also has good ear.
It's extremely silly premise. It's something that could come out of those like older generations of comic books, right? Like it's extremely, extremely silly, but the execution is great.
It was one of those ones that I wasn't really, it almost kind of like caught me off guard because I was really kind of, keen to rewatch World's Finest. And I'm like, and I really loved rewatching that. And we'll talk about that. But Nighttime, I just wasn't totally on my radar. And I was like, oh, this was like, I forgot how good this one is. And yes, a bit of a silly premise, but it's one of those ones that, if this were the first time that Batman and Superman were going to interact, it's like, yeah, no, that wouldn't work. But in the context of the 3-part World's Finest that we've already had, it works because now, Superman knows enough about Batman and Batman's world where you can really have some fun with it. Yeah. And, just little things like when Superman as Batman and Robin are interrogating Penguin and, he's not giving up the information and Robin just whispers, kick over the table. He's like, just do it. And he does it. It's like
very funny.
It's so funny. And, it's also this thing of like, we know that they have very different methods. And, when they first meet in World's Finest, that's a point of contention. But, now Superman is in Batman's world. And so to see him adopt, even some of Batman's methods briefly, it's just kind of interesting to see him in that context. And I can't believe this hasn't come up yet. It's a surprise Brainiac episode.
Ding, ding. Winner, winner. Brainiac dinner. The big homie, of course, getting points again.
And if anyone's like, why didn't you talk about this in the Krypton episode? A, I forgot that Brainiac was in this episode, but B, ultimately I would consider this far more a Batman episode than a Brainiac episode. But we find out that, Batman was infected, or Bruce Wayne specifically was infected with nanites by Brainiac to, create a ship for him to leave Earth. It ends up being this is one of those things where, this happened last episode. We talked about, Superman's pal, right? The Jimmy Olsen centric episode where, Metallo pops up unexpectedly as the villain. Similar thing here. Like as we're getting deep into the series now, we're getting these episodes where you don't need to spend an entire episode with a villain, but they can kind of pop up. And I think it's really, really fun. I like the way Brainiac was used here.
Just like Metallo did in Heavy Metal. Don't think I didn't forget that we ran right by the other homie Metallo, but that's okay.
We'll go again, just real quick. We'll come back.
We'll go back. That's fine. I only have a quick note or two.
But yeah, I love that bit about Brainiac. But what else stood out to you about Nighttime, if anything?
It was probably it's funny actually. You brought up the My Pal Jimmy Olsen episode. Those two episodes I think might have been the funniest that we've seen so far, and I mean that in a good way, where it wasn't like necessarily like slapstick, but very good situational comedy. And I think if World's Finest hadn't established these characters and their relationship that they have, that this episode would not have worked. But because we have a sense of both who they are and how they relate to each other, and what a difficult time one would have being the other, I think that's what makes this episode work. I think it's good fun. It really is good fun. I would always recommend, of course, people to watch World's Finest first. And I think as long as you do that, to put this one more in context, I think it's a home run. A lot of fun.
Yeah, agreed totally. It is very funny, but it's funny because we know the characters and the characters know each other. It's like even when, Superman as Batman shows up on the GCPD roof and like there's like a smile on his face. It's like, this is like, but that's what Superman would do. Like he would, so that was, and when he fights Bane, it's like, it's amazing because Bane is like, what the hell?
great, and what a great choice for them to have Bane as well for that exact reason, right?
Yeah.
Who's used to being able to overpower, at least from a physical standpoint, Bruce. So I thought that was a nice touch. Nice
Yeah.
touch as well too. It's always going to be interesting when you put two very different characters and you drop one in the center of another's world. And they did with the 20 minutes and change they had. I think they did a really nice job of showing what that world would look like.
Exactly. And it was also cool too, the dynamic, because again, Batman himself appears very briefly in this episode. It's really a Superman and Robin story. And, that was cool to see that relationship. And, at the end where, Superman is leaving the Batcave and, he says to Bruce, I forget the exact line, but, basically paying, Timm, a huge compliment. Like the city was in good hands, or, you chose a great partner, something along those lines. It was great.
It's wonderful. Wonderful. And that kind of, again, ties in that whole theme that I was talking about of the Superman, reassuring and inspiring others, especially the younger generations of heroes as well, too. And I just love that we got that episode. You're totally right, because it isn't really a Batman episode. It's a Superman episode, right? It's Superman and Batman's world, but it also, I think, it frames up more Robin than it Timm in this case, than it does Bruce even in that regard, right? And I think it does a really nice job of showing that I don't think we get the idea that in this universe, in the Timmverse, that Bruce Wayne is necessarily a horrible guardian to Timm or Robin's, but it does show that, hey, like maybe Timm does need a little more of an attaboy here and there, or does need that reassurance, and maybe Bruce does take note of that as well too. At least I'd like to think so. So I think that's why that moment was especially important on a few different levels.
Yes, this is not the Bruce Wayne of Frank Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder. He's not making Dick Grayson eat rats in the Batcave.
No, or the Bruce Wayne from Titans, if there's any Titans fans on HBO Max as well too. But yeah.
All right, so World's Finest. I'll toss it to you first. What were your impressions of this 3-part episode that paired them up for the first time in this animated universe?
I would put this Batman Superman story up against anyone in terms of quality, especially as a first meeting story. I think it can rank up there with anything in comics and any other media. It does such a great job of presenting these characters, and the whole kind of, actually, I thought the least interesting part was the finale in a lot of ways, to be honest with you. Even though it was like action packed, you got Joker flying over the city, everything's in peril. It was the cat and mouse game between Bruce and Clark that I love, the one-upsmanship and him using his X-ray vision to use your Bruce Wayne. And then, some time passes and he's in his apartment and he looks out across the way and he just sees Batman looking at him and he gives him the little wave and signal and runs away. Oh, it's so good. It's so good because you get the idea that even though they're very different and they have very, very different skill sets, they are presented as equals in a lot of regards. And I think that's such a hard thing to do. And maybe something we take for granted when you have a Kryptonian and what is ostensibly a peak human being, but it's, a human being. I think that's such a delicate balance to do, but they did such a nice job here of showing both their intelligence, which I'm a big fan of as well, too, and also how they operate, quite differently. Also, can we talk about the fact that in this, again, what is ostensibly a children's cartoon show, were they in a strip club? Is that a thing that happened in this episode? I was watching this episode. I was like, are they just battling it out in a strip club? This is wild.
So along those lines, there's the moment where, Batman uses the jetpack, right? And he lands and Joker has this line. He's like, oh, do you have like propulsion envy? It's
yeah.
Oh, all right. Like, we're making those jokes now. All right.
They definitely were just like, we're going to throw a bunch of stuff past the sensors and hopefully it makes it,
Yeah. But again, like that's a perfect joke where as a kid, I did not know what Joker was talking about.
Right.
It's like now I'm like, oh, okay. So, I think that works great. Yeah, I wasn't particularly clocking the the strip club aspect. But yeah, I think that is, or a nightclub at least. But yeah, I
I mean, they
think
have the
you're
women
spot
dancing
on.
in cages. I mean, again,
Yeah.
people could say maybe it's a nod to the Adam West go-go dancers, maybe. But the first thing I saw when they were fighting, I was like, are they fighting in a strip club in the Saturday morning animated show? 90s are wild, man. 90s were wild.
But no, I agree with you totally. I mean, I remember watching this as a kid and loving it, and it held up amazingly well. I agree with you. I think as far as Batman, Superman stories, there's not much that can beat this on a couple of levels. I think I agree with you totally that it really struck a pretty perfect balance between tension and respect, right? There's tension between these two guys. They both operate very differently. Their abilities both come from different places, right? But there's also this, and there's also the aspect of, kind of Batman coming onto Superman's turf. Maybe that's another reason why Nighttime was so cool, because now you have Superman going into Batman's world. But there's this turf aspect, and we haven't even touched on the Bruce-Lois relationship, which I want to get to in a second.
Sure.
So the tension, I think, is very believable, but at the same time, there's also this respect, and it's one of those things where, instances even in our own lives where, we might think we might be, like rivals with someone, but they might be the only people who really understand, what we're going through. Like we were talking about the community of Superman podcasters, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, again, I've not felt any rivalry, and that's a wonderful thing. But it is one of those things where it's like, any fellow Superman podcaster I talk to, like, even if we are in some respect competing, quote unquote, for listeners, there's also only so many people who know what it's like to plan and host a Superman podcast. So it's like, there's that, that shared experience, right? That these two characters have. Again, their methods are different, and they at times may be at odds, but there's still that respect, and you see them get to know each other, a bit over the course of these three. And then the other thing that I was just so impressed by was the structure and the pacing of these three episodes. Like it did such a good job of blending these two shows and these two characters together so efficiently but effectively. And the pacing was great. And, like we got all the beats that we needed to really know, look, we know who Superman and Batman are, but it's like, even if you didn't, like, you get everything that you need about Superman, Batman, Joker, and Luthor, in a pretty short amount of time, but not at the expense of the development or the dialogue or anything like that. I was really impressed with how it was constructed. It was very, very well done.
Do you know, off the top of your head, how were these episodes presented originally? So I know, like, we've already discussed, I believe, in our first mixtape, in our first episode, how the premiere was an hour and a half block. Was this originally aired as like an hour and a half event, or was this 3 consecutive Saturdays? What do you think?
Audience, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was aired together originally. I believe.
That makes sense. That makes absolute sense, because I think you would lose something if you had that week kind of space in between, right? Especially as a kid, ostensibly watching it. But because it really is, you're watching a movie. Essentially, is what your one long movie, and that's what made that light bulb go off my head is when you said about the pacing. That's exactly what it is. It's like an excellently paced animated film. Essentially, these 3 episodes is what it combines to probably about an hour length, but still, it's just great long form storytelling in that episode of itself. And my biggest pet peeve, one of my biggest pet peeves in art and creation, is when the villain turns to the protagonist and says, "We're not so different, you and I." I never want to hear that line again. This episode does a great job of showing us why Bruce and Clark embody that without telling us. And I think that's a wonderful thing as well.
Oh yeah, that's a great, no, well said. Yeah. I mean, obviously any instance, right, where you can show, not tell is always better. It really worked well. Obviously, in addition to their differing methods, there's also this wrinkle of the romance between Bruce and Lois, which progresses.
Oh boy. Yeah.
It's funny. And look, I know this is a product of me looking at this with adult eyes, but it's like, man, it accelerates real fast. I mean, they go from,
they were going to get engaged.
Like they go from one dinner to being in love, and she's going to move to Gotham City. It was like, whoa.
Yeah, like they were ready, man.
I mean, what was your take on that? Because so the romance in and of itself, I think is a bit of an outlier when we're talking about the larger mythology. Couple of notes on that, but we can jump back to that. But a little bit of an outlier, and also it goes so far as to have Lois find out that Bruce is Batman. She doesn't know Clark is Superman, so that's a whole other dimension. But how did you feel about the Bruce Lois relationship?
I'm of two minds, because my first gut instinct was like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like this. But I think also that's because it was the hook, right? It was that hook that really raised that tension. And if I'm being fair and objective, I don't know if we get kind of that tension that then leads to respect, if that whole arc plays out as nicely as it does, if we don't kind of have that as an inciting incident, right? As it's Mr. Steal Your Girl, Bruce Wayne, rolling up and, dating Lois, and things progressing very, very fast, as you said. Also, I know Bruce is a mastermind and he's always cool as a cucumber. But if an investigative reporter found out my secret identity, I would not handle that as well as he did. And maybe that's why I'm not Batman. But my goodness, that seems like it should have been a much bigger deal. Because I know, again, he feels like, he liked her, maybe loved her. Who knows? Maybe he was doing it to, who knows? I could speculate all day, right? But as we touched upon, this was not a very long period of time where he knew her anyway. It's not like he knew her. It's not like Lana Lang and Clark, right? It's not like they knew each other for years and years and years. I would have been in a panic. My goodness. And that trust, maybe you could argue it's alleviated because he knows that Clark is Superman and he'll be there, and maybe he feels that he'll be there to make sure nobody steps over a line. I don't know, but I was actually really surprised by that reveal that she knows and continues to carry on with that knowledge, working at a prominent news outlet as well too. So
I'm with you. I mean, I guess like you, I'm of two minds as well. There's that gut reaction of this feels wrong. But at the same time, Bruce Wayne and Lois Lane on paper, it does make sense. And you also have the chemistry of the voice actors. I think that, kind of helped. That did help sell it. And we talked about this last time too, I guess, that, the romance is not a huge factor in this animated series. They do touch on it from time to time, but it's not a big part of it. So this was, I guess I did appreciate that, to the extent that it at least forced the issue. Not that it really went anywhere, but at least, it kind of brought it up. I appreciated that. And I was doing a little research, and I almost entirely skipped over the New 52, a few years ago. But
that wounded me, Anthony. That wounded me gravely to hear you say that.
Well, DC just announced that they're doing a Flashpoint sequel that will focus on the Thomas Wayne Batman, and it was all the articles mention that it's been over a decade since Flashpoint. It's like, oh man, but
it's unbelievable to me. But yeah, that's another talk for another day, I suppose.
But apparently, in the New 52, Lois and Bruce, I think it was brief, and whether that means one issue or a few issues, or I don't know. But they toyed with a romance with Lois and Bruce in the New 52, and then. Look, I said I was only going to talk about the Snyderverse once, but are you familiar at all with what Zack Snyder's original plans for Justice League were involving Lois and Bruce? I guess the way I'm phrasing it kind of lets you know what the plans were, but had you heard about any of that?
No, I have not. Please continue.
So Snyder's original plan for Justice League was that Lois and Bruce would have found comfort in each other following Clark's death at the hands of Doomsday. Mm-hmm. And he would have fathered her child, who in the future would have gone on to become the next Batman. And this was not something that ever made it to film. This was something that, I believe this was Warner Brothers mandating this change, I believe, but it was changed at the script level. So this was not a Snyder cut thing where he filmed it and it was nothing like that. This was nixed way earlier.
Well before, yeah.
But that was... that was where he was going with that. And
what do you think about that personally? I'm sorry. Yeah. I have to know.
This puts me in a tough spot because I love the Snyder stuff. But when I remember reading that, I'm like, this just feels wrong.
The bridge too far, right?
It feels like a bridge too far. You know, I do look, at the end of the day, I prefer what we got in Zack Snyder's Justice League. At the same time, look, I got to take my own advice, right? And try to keep an open mind. And it's the sort of thing where I thought that, and I promise I won't take us on a long tangent here, but I thought, you know, Lois in Zack Snyder's Justice League didn't have a ton to do. What she did have, I thought, was effective, and I think it was a compelling depiction of grief, and obviously she plays a key role in, you know, kind of helping Clark snap out of it once he's brought back and he doesn't know what's going on. So it was a pivotal role, but she didn't have a ton to do. So, you know, kind of had they played with a Bruce-Lois romance, it would have given her more to do. And look, one of the things that I'm always defending about these movies is that it took a more realistic view of what would happen if these characters were in the world as it exists. And so, I don't know, these two characters finding some sort of solace in each other during this period of time where they think that Clark is gone, if executed properly, it might have worked. Again, I'm not shedding any tears over the fact that this got nixed and we went in a different direction. But, you know, I won't be so close-minded as to be like, no, there's no way it would have worked. It would have been a different approach. But again,
it would have been Damian. You think the son would have been Damian?
I don't know that they, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what, I don't know if they would have gone that far, but anyway, it's like, and I guess it's sort of a similar thing here with the animated series. It's like, there's still just something that feels wrong.
Yeah. But maybe that's the point, right? Like maybe that's the hook.
Yeah. Well, and you know, we mentioned Smallville a couple of times already, but you know, in that show, you know, they never got to use Bruce Wayne, but they used Oliver Queen, and they used Oliver Queen in, I think it's fair to say, virtually all of the ways they would have used Batman.
Yes.
Which is why I never really felt all that upset that we didn't get to see Bruce Wayne, because I feel like we did. He was just named Oliver Queen, and they spent an entire season with Lois and Oliver in a relationship. So, yeah, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is something to that after all.
Yeah, maybe. It's, you know what? I always applaud people for trying something new and keeping an open mind. So there is something to be said for that. Not to keep it completely negative.
Yeah, you know, for sure. But in any event, yeah, I mean, and again, she goes so far as to learn his secret identity, which then there is a nice payoff to that in the Demon Reborn episode where, you know, right, Ra's al Ghul, you know, is able to, you know, basically drain life force from Superman in order to rejuvenate himself. And there's this scene where Lois has been knocked out by Talia, and Bruce, you know, finds her, and, you know, they have a brief exchange before he disappears while she's talking. So kind of a jerk move. But I had forgotten that. Again, that was one of those like late in the series episodes, like that's the third to last episode. And I had forgotten about that. So it was nice to see at least a little bit of follow up with Lois and Bruce in that one.
Yeah. Again, long form storytelling, right? And that's one of the things we love the best about the Timmverse and all these shows, is that continuity that they really reward longtime viewers for.
Yes. Going back to World's Finest, there was a good segue, because there was one thing that we didn't talk about, I don't think, when we talked about KRYPTONITE, but it comes back here. So again, I think people are probably familiar with this World's Finest arc, but if anyone isn't, right, the Joker comes into possession of this basic KRYPTONITE statue and offers to kill Superman for Lex for money, right, because his finances are in disarray, and he's strapped for cash. And you know, that leads him to Metropolis, and Batman follows and puts them all on a collision course. But at a certain point, you know, Joker kidnaps Lois, and Superman has to rescue her, and he knows that there's kryptonite involved. So he enters the scene wearing his lead suit. And that was what I don't think we had talked about last time, because when we introduced kryptonite, you know, again, Superman builds this, or Professor Hamilton builds him this, you know, lead suit so that he's able to withstand its effects. I do have a specific take on it, but I want to throw it to you first. How do you feel about the lead suit that Superman wears?
It's silly. It's a little silly. Just like anytime you say lead suit, just in general, I mean, it's a little bit silly. I understand what they're going for as like a plot device, but yeah, I mean, it's a little silly. But on the other flip side, we always talk about how I love Clark's intelligence. It is showcasing that a little bit as well too. He came prepared, so there is that as well. So something to think about from that regard.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it makes perfect sense. It's one of those things
Mm-hmm.
where, like, okay, if you really think about this, if you know that the one thing that can kill you won't hurt you if it's bound by, if there's lead in between it
Yeah,
and you, well, what's one way to guarantee that you'll always have it? You
it
wear
makes
a lead
perfect
suit.
sense in the yeah, it makes perfect sense in the rules that have been established within that universe.
Exactly. But I feel like
Yeah,
in practice, it does feel a bit silly. And then it also sort of, I feel like it begs the question. It's like, well, what are we doing here then? Because it's like, if we, I don't know,
right,
it's like
right.
if we want there to be tension, well, then clearly like the lead suit can't be the deciding factor. But so then we need a way to, neutralize the lead suit, which is what happens here, right? Joker uses his acid on it. And then, of course, Batman needs to come in and save him. And then Superman ultimately needs to rescue Batman and Lois. So it's fine. Like it works well enough. I don't, it's not the hill I'm going to die on, but it's just one of those funny things where it really does make sense. I get why they would have done it, but I'm not a huge fan of the lead suit.
Yeah, me neither. I agree. Again, it's silly. It makes sense within universe, but it's silly. I think it's a. I get why he's doing it, and I like that he's prepared. And then, yes, like you said, he has this one thing that would stop him from his greatest weakness. Why wouldn't he do it? But I think you also lose a little bit of the prestige of Superman when you wrap him in a lead suit, right? A little
There,
that's fair to say.
yeah, like there's a little bit of that. I thought of you watching this miniseries where, Mercy. We talked about Mercy
Yeah,
in both of the prior episodes. She takes quite a beating in this three-parter.
she sure does. She sure does. And Mercy might end up being the unsung hero of this whole series. It might, it really and truly, it might end up being kind of one character that I wouldn't have thought twice about, right? Before watching this show, but one character that really has grown on me and struck a chord with me as well too. And again, that long form storytelling. Would we have cared about what happened to her throughout these episodes if we didn't have those prior episodes, the one we talked about in the previous mixtape with, Brainiac, keeping Lex Luthor hostage, but him still leaving Mercy for dead and, picking her up off the streets and Superman just being, very saddened by the whole situation. It's great context. And it's funny how we talked about, playing it back to how I think Nighttime is better having watched World's Finest. It's the same thing where, even though we are doing mixtapes, I think there is a lot to be said for if you are watching certain episodes for that story and that arc with those characters that come before, the payoff is just always so much better.
Yeah, no, totally. And, like I said, like she really gets it in this episode at the hands of Harley Quinn. And then,
Yeah.
Batman pays Lex a visit at night while he's sleeping. And, Mercy
Yeah,
tries to
that
stop,
was cool.
which I want to talk about this for a second because, Mercy, tries to fight off Batman. And of course he, makes quick work of her. But, this poor woman is guarding Lex all day and then clearly is also doing it at, when does this woman sleep? Or was she there for a
Great
different
question.
reason? But she was fully, she was in her bodyguard uniform. So I don't know
And she
that
was
there's,
outside of the room, right?
yeah, right. I think, right. If I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
she comes in, right? I mean, she comes in and Bruce handles that situation there. But yeah, I mean, but again, that's like that unrequited love, that I'm sure she
Yeah.
is there around the clock for anything he needs at any given time. And it's such a sad story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just such a sad story. Poor Mercy. Free Mercy.
Free. I know. Yeah, that's, I'm curious as we get through the final two mixtapes here, what else might come to light about Mercy. Well, that was, talk about characters like Harley Quinn who made the jump to the comics. They would later introduce her in the comics, and there was also Hope as well. There was Hope and Mercy, the two Lex's two bodyguards in the comics. I love at the end of this three-parter where we're at the airfield on the runway, and we see Clark watching as Bruce's plane flies away.
Yeah,
And then at the end of the Demon Reborn episode, we get the same setup, but now they're in their costumed identities. Very
I love
nice
that.
symmetry with that. I thought that was really cool.
Again, rewarding the longtime viewers and the payoffs. And we, I think, mentioned this probably in our very first mixtape, but in a show that could have just been an animated cartoon show Saturday mornings for children, they challenged people of all ages, but I think even specifically younger kids, to rise up to that bar to say, hey, this is good storytelling. This is long form storytelling. And there are such deeper rewards if you pay attention. And that's such a great, great moment. I love that you called that out, that symmetry, and also that evolution, right? That kind of evolution, because the first time they're Bruce and Clark, but now, they're Batman and Superman.
Yeah, for sure. Do you remember when Warner Brothers WB aired episodes of Batman and Superman back to back in that hour-long block, the new Batman Superman Adventures?
Yep.
And how it had its own opening credits?
I'd have to see it again, but I can't recall it off the top of my head. Is it incredible?
It's really, really cool. So it's a different theme that weaves in elements from the Batman opening and the Superman opening, and obviously imagery from both series, and obviously highlights the scenes from World's Finest where they're together. But it's really cool. I looked it up on YouTube because, again, we're watching all these Superman the Animated Series episodes on HBO Max or on Blu-ray, and we're watching the dedicated Superman the Animated Series opening sequence over and over and over. But I was like, I remember as a kid watching that combined version, and it's really, really cool. So if you look up the new Batman Superman Adventures opening, you should find it. But the score is gorgeous. It's really, really effective, and you actually get a few notes of it in that parting sequence from the Demon Reborn. You get like a little bit of it.
I know what I'm doing when we're done here. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, it was very, very cool. Is there anything else that you want to say about these Batman episodes before we circle back to Steel?
No, I mean, again, watch them. I put them up there with any relationship that they have in comic books or any other medium.
Yes. All right. Actually, before Steel, I know we touched on A Fish Story, introducing Aquaman. I to be honest, I don't necessarily have a ton to say. Like I said before, I like that, it was, it wasn't like doing Aquaman's origin story in the Superman universe. He came in and, we got this, again, the traditional depiction, right? I think, or at least in modern times, where we have this tension between, this ocean kingdom and the surface dwellers. But I thought it was done well. I know you said it was not, though, one of your favorites.
No, I mean, I understand Aquaman's perspective. He just came off as just so incredibly antagonistic, where really you don't get the idea. I didn't get that same begrudging level of respect. Even the ending was just so abrupt, I felt like, with that war breaking out. It was such a hopeless ending in a show that is usually so hopeful. And I think that's maybe why it rubbed me the wrong way. Also, the first time we see Aquaman, he's captured. I mean, come on. Just, again, that's me being nitpicky, sure. But it's like, I want to see him out there meeting Superman for the first time, already established, like we talked about, doing his thing. That's what I want to see, have it more organically. But there wasn't anything that, and Arthur is such a difficult character, right? And I actually have my own thoughts on Jason Momoa as Aquaman as well, too, that I won't get into too much here. But he's such a difficult character, and I think there's a lot of good and a lot of awesome stories to be told with that character. But I feel like here it was just surface dwellers bad. Let's fight. And I didn't get any of that humanity, that kind of common ground that gives Superman that kind of room to inspire and talk and, okay, let's figure this out. He tries a little bit when he says, oh, they're not all like that. But then just a war breaks out and proves him wrong anyway. It just was such a hopeless situation. It was very depressing to me.
No, honestly, that is fair. I think for me, a lot of this came down to the fact, sad to say, but maybe this kind of piggybacks off of what you were saying. I'm not a huge Aquaman fan, and I never have been. I don't dislike the character, but there have been very few instances where I've really found Aquaman compelling. That's why, I am a huge fan of Flash and Green Lantern. So those episodes, I was a little bit more kind of, zeroing in on what they were doing. And I had, I felt a certain way about how those characters were presented. Whereas with Aquaman, and, I'm happy to hear your thoughts on Jason Momoa. For me, that was, I'm trying to think, even as much as I love Smallville, I wasn't all that taken with their version of Aquaman. He was solid, but I wasn't like, oh, I'm an Aquaman fan now. Watching Jason Momoa in the Snyderverse and in his solo movie was probably the first time where I was like, oh, okay, like I get Aquaman. Like I can get on board with this version. I did also read the Jeff Johns and New 52 run on that title, and I actually quite liked that. But otherwise, yeah, like I'm not a big Aquaman guy, so that's why maybe I wasn't as invested and I didn't feel as strongly.
Yeah, fair enough. So I love Jason Momoa. I'm a big Game of Thrones fan as well too, and I thought he's a lot of fun in those movies. But I felt like I was just watching Jason Momoa and not Aquaman. Okay. And again, as we talked about before, every interpretation of a character is valid, but I felt like I was just watching Jason Momoa, and there was a part of it that was missing for me, at least in terms of how he was again relating to other characters. And I guess maybe that's not necessarily his fault. Maybe it's not even this episode's a fishtail. Maybe that's not necessarily different. Maybe it's very difficult to have Aquaman relate to his fellow characters. Maybe that's an inherently difficult thing to accomplish and do. But I feel like that there are good stories to be. I'm not the biggest Aquaman fan either. I think there are plenty of good stories. I've enjoyed some stuff. There's a story too called Once in Future that I actually really enjoyed as well too. But yeah, you have to work a little harder, I think, to find that humanity and that common ground of somebody who is of two worlds, and that's just it. I just did it right there. That's how you have him and Superman connect. They're both of two worlds, right? I wish we could focus on something like that. Again, how I hate people say we're not so different, you and I, but show it. Be like, hey, I understand what it's like to be here, but also not be from here. And what a difficult thing, and how to wrestle with that. Your conflict's external. Mine is mostly internal, although Brainiac does make it external as well, too, as we've touched upon. But I would love to see maybe just more of a common ground for something to relate to be like, you know what? I hope next time we see art, I hope maybe they can settle their differences for a greater good together. Maybe they can come together at some point. Give me something to hold on to, a little bit of hope.
You're right. I mean, I think that was a missed opportunity, and it's funny because maybe this is, even though I wouldn't have wanted them to necessarily do, like, again, turn Aquaman's origin story into a Superman episode like they did with Green Lantern, but maybe but more particularly Superman had gotten, whether he learned it in this episode or they had already had some sort of past and he already knew this. But if Superman knew some of the backstory, the fact that Arthur is of two worlds, like Superman is, that would have opened up a space to have a moment like that. Because I agree with you. I mean, I think that is where those two characters could find common ground, and we just didn't get any of that. So I think your point is well taken. And again, going back to the Jason Momoa Aquaman, I guess like that's sort of the thing. Like I love him as the character, but it's also one of those things where, well, once he's not playing the character, am I an Aquaman fan, or was I really just a Jason Momoa as Aquaman fan? And if it's the latter,
which is fine.
Right.
Don't get me wrong.
Like that's fine, but right. It's like, it didn't necessarily make me a fan of the character. And I don't know if I can answer that, at this exact point in time, but
yeah,
I think what that episode needed, really more than Arthur backstory, anything like that, it was really more time with Jimmy Olsen trying to park Lois's car. I really feel like that was the best part of the episode, don't you think?
Well, I 100% relatable. I loved it.
Your screen has frozen, but I can still hear you. So as long as you can hear me, I think we're still good to rock on here.
I'm trying to get my my phone to charge is what I'm also trying to do.
Fair enough. Well, while you work on that, let's jump to the final two episodes here, and not final in terms of episode order / air date, but just in terms of what you and I are talking about, sort of categorizing these DCU team ups. Right, we have the Batman, the larger DC universe, And then, Steel, I think, kind of can be in his own category because he is part of the larger DC universe, but he is a dedicated Superman supporting cast member in the comics and the show. So I think Steel is kind of in his own, little category here. And there are 2 episodes that feature the character of John Henry Irons, Prototype and Heavy Metal. So in Prototype, we have this SCU, police officer who dons this suit of armor designed by John Henry Irons, who at this point in time works for Lex Luthor. And, initially starts off great, but the suit and its neurological connection to Corey Mills, the officer, starts to corrupt his mind, and he gets drunk with power. And, of course, Superman has to stop him. But, it ends, and you had touched on this earlier, I believe, with, Superman talking to John Henry about how, in theory, the idea of having some backup, having some help is a positive thing. Like, he would welcome that. And so, we end that episode. I love that. It's this great note to end on where, we see the wheels are turning, in John Henry's mind. And so obviously, this take on the character is wholly divorced from the comic book origin where he, rises in the wake of Superman's death and was inspired by Superman and dons the suit of armor to carry on his memory. Obviously, we don't have any of that, but I was just happy to see John Henry Irons. I think I was excited initially, but especially now, having recently revisited that entire period of the death and return and reign and everything. Like, I was very, very happy to see John Henry Irons.
A standout from the entire series thus far from me. And just, even if you weren't familiar, and I think he is such an interesting character, of course, coming out of such a formative event for you with the death of Superman and spinning all of that in the comics as well. Even if you had no comic or former knowledge of the character, you could watch these 2 episodes, root for him, understand who he is, understand his motivation. And not only that, it's such a great lens for Superman as well, too. Because like you said, even though he's Superman, Metropolis and the world, very big place. Very, very big place. And I like the idea that Superman doesn't have to do it alone, but he also doesn't want to do it alone. And I think that's such an important part as well, too. And I already touched upon their handshake, and his thank you was a high point so far for me in the entire run. I mean, what a beautiful moment! A beautiful moment between two wonderful characters.
Yeah, it was very, very cool. In the Prototype episode, but it's funny, people will hear this when they hear my Smallville wish list episode with Zach Moore that I talked about earlier in a few weeks. But it always bugged. I feel like a missed opportunity on Smallville was introducing John Henry Irons as someone who worked for Lex. Like they just never used the character on the show. But I feel like what the animated series did was like a perfect way into the character, again, without getting into the whole, death and reign and all of that business. But I enjoyed all of that. This is a little nitpicky, I guess, especially for a Saturday morning kid show, but it would have been interesting in the Prototype episode with Corey Mills if his descent had been a little bit more psychological and nuanced instead of like the suit just drove him crazy. Like, I feel like it would have been interesting to see a little bit more of him just getting drunk on the power and on, the adoration of the crowd. That's there. But I think a lot of this kind of boils down to just the suit and its connection to his mind. And I would have preferred it if it had been a little bit more, internal as opposed to the suit doing it.
I agree. And again, I wonder how much of that is, again, it's maybe the time constraints as well, too, that they do have. But is that kind of, like I said in a previous episode that I got a wonderful shout out from always hold on to Smallville about being Black Mirror, like I'm Black Mirror-ish. This is the same kind of like dread body horror that I love, right? It's just, you take this thing that's supposed to be great and you twist it and you turn it into something ugly. And I love that story. And he really does a number on Superman, huh? I did not expect him to, he blinds him. He really gives him a run for his money here.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Side note, you're still totally do you see yourself as moving on your screen? Because you're still frozen on mine.
Not at all. And I'm losing battery power too. It's the Wild West over here, Anthony,
Oh my goodness. Because I know you were trying to charge it, but you were not able to.
So it was charging Now it says it's charging, but it's still rapidly descending, which I
All
hope
right.
isn't a metaphor for my current situation in general. But
No, all right. Well, we're nearing the end in any event. So yeah, I agree with you. He really gives Superman a hard time, and the scene where he blinds him, I was like, wow, like they're really putting Superman through his paces here, and it was
yeah,
interesting. But going back to what we said in a prior episode, this is a depowered version of the character, and which I think allows you to do an episode like this, where I feel like in other incarnations, him battling a police officer in a suit like really wouldn't pose much of a challenge, but here it does, and especially when he is blinded, and you see the physical representation of that, like his eyes are blasted and
yeah.
they're dark, and
You even see like through his perspective, kind of how he's not able to see or get his senses or orientation. It was actually a pretty intense fight, much more so than I thought it was going to be.
yeah, it really rings his bell. So again, we end on this promise of like, oh, John Henry, might, kind of, heed Superman's, wish, right? And he does in the heavy metal episode.
Yeah.
We begin with him creating, forging this suit of armor. I tell you, man, the only thing missing was the soundtrack, the theme, the score from the Steel movie with Shaq. That was the only thing that I think would have really brought this episode over the top.
If they, you know what? So actually, where does that fall on the timeline? Does this come before that movie or after?
Oh man, it's right. I mean, because the animated series was 96 to 2000 and the movie was
Right.
97. So, I
Yep.
mean, this episode probably was after, but very close after.
So that would have been perfect tie-in as well too. Who knows? It might have even been a motivation. So that would have been awesome. They could have had the theme mixed in as well, man.
I know. But so it was, it was awesome to see, I loved, and, look, Ken Marion and I, we did 2 hours on the Steel movie. We're fan. I know you're a fellow fan as well.
Oh yeah.
So it was really cool and as a fan of the Reign of the Superman, it was so cool to see John Henry Irons. Again, my only real regret with this episode was that we didn't see him again on the show. It sets him up as this ally, this friend, and that was it.
He should have been a solid reoccurring character for sure. It's the cheat is, of course, we do see him a little bit down the road in Justice League Unlimited and everything. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen him been a daily, a regular-ish, even for a check-in or a quick few minutes, maybe at the start of an episode of them teaming up together would have been a nice nod.
Yeah, and of course, like you said before, we do find out, Metallo is our antagonist. You don't find that out until a little bit into the episode.
Surprise! Right? He's using that brain again, Anthony, disguised as a police officer. Oops, pow, surprise! Sucker punch to Superman. You love to see it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And well, it's funny though, that brings me to, anyway, I thought that was an effective use of Metallo. I know I said in the last episode, I do agree with you. I think this is the best version of Metallo. Still not my favorite Superman villain, but I do appreciate these episodes like this one and Superman's Pal, where it's a surprise, right? Even if sometimes the episode description gives it away, but where as you start to watch the episode, you don't know exactly, what role he'll play or when he'll enter the picture. I think that's an effective way to use Metallo. But at the beginning of the episode, we have these bank robberies that, have not been solved yet. And we have Bibbo Babowski on the news. I believe that's the same episode, talking about what he saw. And I just wanted to mention Bibbo because I don't think he really came up when we did our prior episode on the supporting cast. I love Bibbo, and he was a prominent supporting cast member from the entire Triangle era of the comics. And well, except for the final few years, once Jeff Loeb and Joe Kelly took over, he kind of went to the sidelines. But I wish they hadn't made him as mentally deficient as they did. I mean, they really made him a punchline, and fair enough, I suppose. But you look at the comic book version, and no, he's not necessarily a great intellectual, but he has this very pure heart. There's this whole run in the comics where he wins the lottery, and the only thing he does with all the money is help the people in the neighborhood in Suicide Slum. So he's a very kind-hearted character, and I feel like you don't really get that. He's really used more for jokes here, and is like barely functioning, as he's presented in here. Yeah. So I thought they did him a little disservice,
especially in a show that focuses so much on the heart and the power of humanity and people as well. It definitely seems like a missed opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. But I enjoyed that pair of episodes a lot. And like I said, it was really cool. It was cool to see Steele. If the worst thing I could say about those episodes is that we didn't see him again, but I thought within the
Yeah,
context, it was cool. We got Natasha, the niece, they worked her in as well.
yeah.
They referenced the grandmother. I mean, it really,
Everybody got time to shine, which was cool.
they really had the ingredients. So we've covered all of the episodes. We're fast approaching the 2-hour mark. Your phone is dying. I think this is a good place to wrap it up. Is there anything else that you want to say about these DCU team up episodes?
I'm maximum effort tonight. Tonight was maximum effort, full send. I love these episodes in general, even the ones that I might not like as more. And a lot of that, and this is a cheating answer, when you know that eventually we are going to get Justice League. It's so cool to kind of see the genesis of that from the ground up. And so I'll leave everybody with that. And again, to bring it home to my full, real, put a bow on everything point to these episodes is that these characters are fantastic heroes in their own right. But on Superman's show, the best episodes are when they help as a lens to show who Superman is and how he inspires everyone else.
Well said, my friend. The last thing I'll say in parting, just to, sort of circle back to the way we're watching, and I know this has come up in both of the prior 2 episodes, but it really has been immensely rewarding to do this rewatch mixtape style, because especially taking these team up episodes, you do sort of get like a little proto Justice League run.
Yeah, for sure. It's really cool. It's really cool to see, and it's making me itching and excited to take a peek down the road at Justice League. To be honest with you, but you probably already knew that's where my mind was going.
We'll get there. We'll get there. I've already mapped out some stuff for the future. Well, you and I will talk off mic, but
I believe that completely.
But yeah, no, watching it this way was really cool, and I think for the most part, I think you and I both landed more or less on the side of, really enjoying the vast majority of these episodes. And, even ones that might not have been our favorite, like Speed Demons or A Fish Story or whatever the case may be. I do really still appreciate the fact that we got them in the first place. Going back to what we said before, like at the time, this was a big deal to see these characters team up. And, even an episode like Speed Demons that maybe, wasn't the most, in depth, it still was an effective, faithful presentation of the character. It put them together in a classic fashion, and allowed for, a fun episode. And so again, even the weaker ones within these team ups still had something to offer and laid the groundwork for what was to come. So this was a great run of episodes. And for anyone who hasn't watched some or all of them, or if you haven't watched them in a while, they're definitely worth a rewatch.
It's important to remember, too, to contextualize everything, that for an entire generation of people and fans, this is their first time, most likely, seeing these heroes outside of a comic book. And that's really cool, and that's really special.
Indeed. Even if you came away from it thinking that Green Lantern was a Superman supporting cast member, that's all good.
Yeah. I mean, at least it's an experience. At least I got to see them in action. So I think you're right. Even if they weren't our favorites, and we would have liked to have seen things a little different, they're historic and worthy in their own right.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you to the audience. Make sure that you come back in 1 week for our next mixtape. We will be discussing episodes dealing with the villains, the Rogues Gallery. It'll be a real fun mix of episodes, and I'm sure we'll have a fun discussion. So we'll have that for you in 1 week. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action.